Okay, so now we're going to do the bear's paw block from lesson 2 of Learn to Quilt. So after you've trimmed all your half square triangles, the 4 that are the same color fat quarter that you cut your 6.5-inch square out of in class, those are going to be the 4 half square triangles that you use for the bear's paw. So in addition to that 6.5-inch square, you need your 4 3.5-inch square half square triangles, 1 background square that's 3.5 inches, and then once we put the bear's paw together, we're going to put the sashing around it. So you're going to need your 2 background 2 by 9.5 background rectangles and your 2 by 12.5-inch background rectangles. So the first thing we're going to do, if we just sort of ignore the sashing for now, as we need to get this bear's paw put together. So the first thing you've got to do is join the 2 half square triangles with a 1/4-inch seam allowance, and then join them to the 3.5-inch background square with a 1/4-inch seam allowance, and press all of those seams, both of those seams, to the right. Then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to join these 2 half square triangles together and join those 2 sort of in the downward direction if you're sort of looking at it this way. So let's go do that first. So I'm going to go take these away and come back with those made. Okay, so now I'm back with these put together. So I've joined these 3 squares together, pressed all the seams to the right. I've joined these 2 together and I've pressed the seam down. So now what we need to do is we need to join this the 2 half square triangle units here to the 6.5-inch square. Now what you should notice, if you've done your 1/4-inch seam correctly, that when you put them right sides together, they should be the same length, okay? If they're not, you need to just keep working on your 1/4-inch seam allowance. And it's always worth, if they are slightly off, a little bit of pinning now goes a long way to save you grief later, because you could probably sort of make them fit at this point by, you know, stretching one just a little bit to fit the other. So do pin. Pinning's also important because it's going to stop them from shifting when you're sewing them. So I would at least put a pin in each end. Okay, so we're going to sew this one together, and then we're going to press the seam towards the 6.5-inch square. Right, so I'm back with this. I've now joined this unit with the 2 half square triangles to the 6.5-inch square. I press the seam towards the 6.5-inch square. Remember, one of the things you're looking for here is a nice sort of point there where all 3 of these fabrics all meet, okay? So the next step now is to join this sort of top half, so to speak, to the bottom half. So we've got an important point here that we've got to pin to make sure that those are lined up. So because we press this this seam this way and we press that seam that way, we can lock those 2 seams together. So how do we do that, right? So we put this right sides together, and you can see here one seam going that way, one going the other way. I usually just kind of slide the 2 into each other until I can feel that those 2 seams are meeting. And then I'm going to put a pin on the right hand side of that, perpendicular to the way that I'll be sewing. Okay, so that's really important to have a pin there. Then what I'm again going to do is I'm going to put a pin near the beginning. I'm going to put another pin near the end. Again, they should be the same length. If they're not the same length, we can do a little bit of fudging, but if you're consistently finding that these things aren't the same length, we just need to keep working on your 1/4-inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm ready to go sew this. Okay, I'm back. I've just sewn the sort of the top half to the bottom half, and your instructions say to press the seam down. So I've pressed the seam down towards the bottom half. Again, we've got a nice intersection because we pin there. Everything meets nice and neatly there. And we are now ready to sew on these sashing background pieces. So the 2 that go on first are the 2-inch by 9.5-inch sashing pieces. So one goes on the left side, the other goes on the right side. Sorry, I've said that exactly the opposite of what it is. So, but we're going to put those on the 2 sides. Again, pin. So if we take this should be the same length. We want to put a pin on each side to make sure that they, I've run out of pins, but we're going to put another pin on this side here. We're going to sew those two together. Then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, and we are going to press those out towards the sashing rectangles. Okay, so here we go. We've got the two side sashing background rectangles sewn onto each side. Press the seams out towards the background rectangles. The last thing for the sashing to do is to put the two 2 by 12.5-inch rectangles on the top and the bottom. So again, right sides together. We want to pin each of the ends most definitely. I would say this is getting a bit longer as well, so it's not going to hurt to put a few pins on the inside as well. So let's put one on each end first just to make sure that they're all lined up. And then I would probably go ahead and just put a couple more on the inside as well, just to make sure that everything is fitting together and you don't end up with a bit at the edge that just suddenly doesn't fit. So we're going to do that top and bottom, and I will go and sew those and bring that back to show you what it looks like. Okay, so that's our block all put together. And now what we might as well do is go ahead and just do the spacer while we're at it. So from the other two fat quarters that you cut in our lesson 2, you've got two 2.5 by 6.5 rectangles from the other two fat quarters that we cut. So what we're gonna do is join those two together with a 1/4-inch seam, and then we're gonna join them to the bottom of the bear's paw block. So let's just do that. Alright, so that's the bear's paw block now with the spacer unit below it. So I sewed those two rectangles together first. Doesn't really, because this is at the bottom of your quilt, doesn't really matter which way you press the seam. I press mine to the right. And then once I sewed that on, remember, pin it because it should be the same length. And once you sew it on, then press that seam allowance down towards that spacer unit. Okay, so that's your bear's paw block all finished and ready to go on to the friendship stars next.